So that means we have to work 60% more just to make the same amount and have the same level of income to buy food and housing. So now that sounds like a bunch of wonk speak that might seem like it only matters to someone staring at a spreadsheet or a graph or a chart. Our households are by far the most indebted in the G7. When you divide total household debt by GDP, we now have a bigger stock of household debt than our entire economy. We are more indebted as households than the Americans were right before the 2008 financial crisis. Model in Canada is we have artificial scarcity imposed by a very heavy and restrictive state, confiscatory state, that suppresses production. But in order to model in Canada is we have artificial scarcity imposed by a very heavy and restrictive state, confiscatory state, so that suppresses production.
But I think Canada does have some pretty extreme problems when it comes to housing people. But I think Canada does have some pretty extreme problems when it comes to housing people. But I think Canada does have some pretty extreme problems when it comes to housing people. Hey guys, remember to like the video and hit subscribe.
Right now, and that's productivity sounds complicated. It's actually extremely simple. You just take the GDP and you divide it by the hours worked in the country.
So as soon as I hear this, I'm thinking like, uh-oh, there's a right-wing guy, I guess he's supposed to be right-wing, coming into Canada who might actually know some econ shit. It's like, oh, okay, oh, well, fuck. That's great for us in the US because maybe Canada's right-wing is not fucking insane. So now people will look in the Canadian region and be like, well, look, their right-wing is really smart, so we should have ours do economic policy too. I'm like, okay, wow, okay. It's the first time I think I've ever heard a political person or pundit know what productivity even means. Like, oh, cool, okay, well, let's see what he's got to say.
Sounds complicated. It's actually extremely simple. You just take the GDP and you divide it by the hours worked in the country. So American GDP is $80. So for every hour an American worker works, on average, he or she produces $80 of GDP. In Canada, it's 50. So that's every hour. So that means we have to
do huge things like investments in education and everything, or some type of more specialized worker training to increase the productivity of our workers, right? So I figure it's probably going to be a lot maybe on like the unaffordability of college or education, or how you get like more people trained to be a more productive workforce, right?
Every hour. So that means we have to work 60% more just to make the same amount and have the same level of income to buy food and housing. So now that sounds like a bunch of wonk speak that might seem like it only matters to someone staring at a spreadsheet or a graph or a chart. But in fact, that's reflected in the fact that our 2 million people are lined up at food banks because they can't afford food. And
no, that doesn't really have anything to do with anything that we just talked about. But I guess if you have a less productive labor force, then overall the state of your economy may not be as good. So maybe there would be more people lined up for food banks, but there's not really a direct connection. But okay, I don't know. Maybe he's just making a broader argument about the economy. Okay.
80% of youth can't afford homes, and our quality of life and the things we can afford to provide our kids have fallen back so much.
Well,
there's real life.
Stark.
Oh, is quality of life in Canada down? Or are we just complaining about how expensive housing is? I would say in Vancouver and Toronto, but I think even the suburbs outside of that are quite expensive too. But like, are we just complaining about cost of housing, or has quality of life in Canada actually receded significantly, or receded at all? But
easily comprehensible statistic. And if you work and you produce $80 worth of goods and services in an hour compared to working and producing 50, obviously that's a substantial shortfall. So, and is there a starker indicator of the? Okay,
we're at some point, we're going to talk about the types of jobs that people work and how to create a more productive workforce, right? Or it's kind of weird that we brought up like productivity and everything, but okay,
Is there a starker indicator of the economic disparity between the US and Canada than that? Or do you think that's the primary statistic?
I mean, I think
so that's just one number, right? That's just like one number. That's not like a diagnosis or an analysis of an entire economy. Right.
Housing costs are another one. There was a study out just 10 days ago that has Toronto and Vancouver now by far the most unaffordable housing markets in North America. And so, housing costs are 50% higher in Toronto than they are in Chicago, even though Chicago workers make 50% more money. The same is true between Vancouver and Seattle. Seattle workers make way more than Vancouver workers, but housing is 60 or 70% more expensive in Vancouver. So on all of the measures,
less by a lot.
Yes. By a lot.
Yeah.
And we're paying more.
Paying more by a lot.
Yeah.
I am curious about this. In Canada, and I guess in Europe, in the rest of the world, do you guys have, are your are your cities like our cities, or is this an American thing? So in America, we'll have a city like this will be the city of Chicago. And then this will be another city, and 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 this will be another city. But this is the only actual, this is the city of Chicago. But everybody that lives in any of these like adjoined cities or any of these suburbs, all say they're from Chicago. Is that the same in in Canada and in Europe as well? Or like if you live in LA, that could mean like 20 different cities, I think. Like I think people who live in like Brentwood or WeHo or like Santa Monica or Venice or like I think all of those people just say, oh, I'm from LA. I live in LA. You would just say that. But I'm curious what the rent comparisons are here. Like if Seattle encompasses as many people as Vancouver. Vancouver average rent, Seattle average rent. These fucking AI overviews. I wonder, does apartments.com, oh, here we go. Are these prices in USD or CAD? Some charts about Canada. I love you, and I'm not trying to say anything about you, and I don't know anything about you. Like I'm not trying to over-stereotype this or over-generalize this, and I admit that I could be wrong on this, okay? I'm just being super honest. I don't trust anything about, like from subreddits called like Europe or Canada or whatever on Reddit, because I feel like I've run into these subreddits before, and like randomly they will just be full Nazi subreddits. I don't know why. I don't know how that happens. Maybe that Canada subreddit, maybe it's not, but there are Canada and Europe subreddits where I go to them and I click, and it's just full Nazi. I don't know why or how that happens, so I'm not sure which ones of those I can even trust. I don't know. Okay. Oh, this is Vancouver, Washington. I wonder if apartments.com lists. Okay, here we go. So 1-bedroom apartment is about $2,300 a month for 539 square feet, and 651 square feet for a 1-bedroom, and $2,000 a month in Seattle. So Vancouver seems to be a tad more expensive with less square footage. CAT versus USD? Well, yeah, but they earn and pay in CAD there, so I don't think you would do a currency conversion here, right? I don't think that would make sense. Well, I guess you'd have to look up. Would the St. Louis Federal Reserve have Canada data? Median wages, Vancouver. I don't know what you look up for. I don't know, like what are good sites for Canadian economic data. StatsCan or CMHC is good. Is King County Seattle? What county is Seattle in? King County. King shit. Jesus. Household income includes all the workers in the household, right? Household income includes income of the householder and all other people 15 years and older in the household, whether or not they are related to the householder. Meeting is the point. Okay. Damn. This is a retarded question, but household includes apartments, right? That's not just houses, right? I feel like comparing the median income of all of British Columbia, because like you can live in Vancouver and you can live like way the fuck out in the boonies, no? Like British Columbia has a lot of empty random but I don't know how many people like live like up here and shit. Probably not many. Maybe it is a decent estimate, but okay. Just curious for a baseline.
By a lot.
Yes.
By a lot.
By a lot.
Yeah.
And
like
we're paying more.
Paying more by a lot.
Yeah.
Right, and most of that's transpired in the last 10 years.
Yes, and we're paying the difference by accumulating enormous quantities of debt. Our households are by far the most indebted in the G7. When you divide total household debt by GDP, we now have a bigger stock of household debt than our entire economy. We are more indebted as households than the Americans were right before the 2008 financial crisis. And so what we have is...
Okay, I don't think household debt was a player in that financial crisis, but that was a financial crisis that was bad. So, okay, I guess okay.
Model in Canada is we have artificial scarcity imposed by a very heavy and restrictive state, confiscatory state. So that suppresses production. Mm-hmm. But in order... Model in Canada is we have artificial scarcity imposed by a very heavy and restrictive state,
okay,
confiscatory state. So that suppresses production. Mm-hmm. But in order to allow for consumption, we print money and borrow money and then flood the economy with that money.
Okay, so that's another problem. So that's the...
Okay. All right. So like he's diagnosing some problems correctly. I think at this point, I think it's pretty easy to say that I have to be careful. I can never grant anything to any of these fuckers. But I think Canada does have some pretty extreme problems when it comes to housing people. Not even just near the cities, but like even if you're quite a ways out of the cities. When I say cities, I'm talking about like 3 of them. But like the housing is pretty expensive. He's identified this concept in economics known as worker productivity, which is the measure of like your economic output per your hours worked, basically. Okay. which is nice. I don't ever usually hear people talk about econ or finance terms when they're in politics, but then is it all really just going to come back to printing money? Is that, or is there more here, or?
Inflationary problems.
Yes.
Now, the problem with inflation, there's many problems with inflation, but one of them is that it particularly punishes people who are thrifty and who save.
Yes.
Right. So inflation punishes the people who forego gratification to invest in the future.
That's right.
Right. So that's a very bad idea.
It's a horrible. Inflation is the single most immoral tax.
I'm really curious who this came from, that inflation is the most immoral tax. 'Cause I've heard so many people say it. There's some dipshit said this like a few years ago, and I just don't know who it was. Can somebody tell me where this stupid fucking line came from? Tom used this, or he said this to me when I was debating him in, on the Impact Theory show. I'm a retard. What does it mean when someone says that a government flooded the economy with the printed money? I'm not going to speak at all to Canada because I don't know if their system and everything, it works the same as ours. So I can't really say. Wow, Lalo, thanks for the tier 5 sub, everybody.
For so many reasons. One, it takes from savers and people who are trying to be responsible, thus making it impossible to be responsible. Right. Because you will, if you refuse to play the inflation game of borrowing money to buy things you can't afford, someone.
I don't know what the inflation game to borrow money to buy things you can't afford. I don't know what it has to do with the inflation game. That just sounds like consumer credit spending on goods that you can probably put off buying. I don't know what that means, but okay.
Else inevitably will, and you won't be able to afford anything. So you ultimately have to act responsibly. It's like Milton Friedman was asked, what would you do with your money in times of inflation? He said, spend it.
Right.
I didn't look this up. What is the source for that Milton Friedman quote? I would be surprised if somebody asked Milton Friedman, what should somebody do in a heavy inflation period? And he's like, oh, spend your money on depreciating or consumable consumer goods. Like your money should be moving. You should be investing it, like buying stock and stuff for sure, of course. But is that an actual Milton Friedman quote? If it is a quote, it's fucking retarded. It's a stupid. I have a feeling that it's probably just it's probably an oversimplification of something else. Does anybody have? I really want the source for this. Spend it. Inflation 200. Increase your volume. You're like 40% lower than the video playing. I am loud enough. Fuck you.
Responsibly.
This is really loud.
Like Milton Friedman was asked, what would you do with your money in times of inflation? He said, spend it.
Right.
Like the first thing you want to do when inflation is out of control is to make sure you get rid of this thing that's losing its value.
But that's good. We don't ever want people hoarding sums of cash. You don't ever, ever, ever want that. It's like, it's the worst thing that you could ever have in an. Well, actually, I don't know. Where's Metal Sword or Metalloid Sword? I always fuck his name up. Would you ever want an environment where citizens are just hoarding money in banks? It just seems like the worst possible thing. Like you always want, spend also means invest, but these people are retards. Yeah, that's what I think Milton's, if you find that original Milton Friedman quote, it probably meant that. It makes sense, but can you explain why? Because money sitting in a bank account is, I mean, theoretically, I guess the bank can make loans against it, but I don't think the banks are short on deposits to loan against. You want people to do stuff with their money so they can either buy goods and services, meaning you're going out and you're spending in the economy, which does a whole bunch of things. It increases demand, which helps suppliers, which helps employers and employees that are working jobs. So that's good. Or you can invest in businesses. It gives people capital to have somebody's money and then go out and start a business so that they can also sell things and employ people and everything else. You want like money moving through an economy. Money that just goes and sits in a bank is like, it's just not good. I don't know. You just would never, it's just not a good thing, I don't think.
The second reason it's immoral is it takes from the poor. Because
also this idea, remember how I said it feels like people attach a lot of normativity to economic and finance terms, right?
Times of inflation. He said have to act someone else inevitable. If you refuse to play the inflation, thus making it one, it takes, or inflation is the single most immoral tax.
Inflation is not immoral.